Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 6th Annual Health Education and Alzheimer's Disease Talks, otherwise known as HEAD Talks. We're so glad you could join us tonight. I'm Jackie Sett, Physical and Mental Health Committee Chair of the Columbia Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. We have a fantastic evening planned in partnership with a phenomenal chapter within Maryland and Annapolis Alumni Chapter. Today, we'll share information about Alzheimer's disease in a TED Talk fashion in collaboration with the Green Foundation, Johns Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and the Baltimore Alumni Chapter of North Carolina A&T State University. Tonight's event will address important topics in brain health, research, caregiver support, brought to you by experts who are passionate in making a difference in Alzheimer's awareness and education. And our goal tonight is to share invaluable insights and resources around Alzheimer's disease while helping to foster a greater understanding of brain health. Each speaker will provide a fresh perspective and practical tools to support caregivers and individuals. Tonight's event will feature 3 short, engaging talks on brain health and Alzheimer's disease, each followed by a Q&A session. We'll also begin each with a quick memory exercise to encourage everyone to engage their own brain health. Just a few housekeeping exercises before we begin. Just to make sure that we have any questions, you can type them in the chat and the moderator will be able to answer any of those questions from the Q&A. Please keep yourself muted during the presentations and please reduce any background noise. And so we want to kick things off. We're going to have Corinne come up and she's going to do a quick memory exercise to get our minds engaged. This will only take a few minutes and is a fun way to prime our minds for this evening's event. So Corinne.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So as Jackie mentioned, I'm going to kick us off with just an engaging activity. You can think of it more as a game. I'm going to read you a list of 10 words, and I want you to try to remember these without, of course, writing them down, because I'm going to ask you to recall them, as many of them as possible later this evening. So I'll read the list of words, read one word about every 2 seconds. All right, here we go. And no writing them down. Cabinet, courage, flower, gold, bed, nightstand, honest, car, noble, chair. All right, Jackie. That's our 10 words.
Again. Can we get them again? Okay. No, we can't get them again. Okay, never mind. Okay. We're gonna go. It'll be fine. We got it. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and start, guys. Our first head expert is Jennifer Deal. Jennifer is an epidemiologist and a gerontologist with expert in hearing loss and cognitive aging. She's an associate professor of epidemiology and otorhinology, head and neck surgery at Johns Hopkins University, and associate director of academic training with Johns Hopkins Cochlear Center of Hearing and Public Health. Dr. Deal studies sensory loss of impacts of the brain of older adults and public health strategies needed to mitigate these effects. Jennifer will explore the impacts of hearing loss on cognitive health and its relevance to Alzheimer's disease. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. So as Jackie mentioned, my name is Jennifer Deal. My visual description, so I am a middle-aged white female. I have short blonde hair. I'm wearing a striped shirt, a black sweater, and glasses. And I am here to talk tonight about the link between hearing loss and cognition, specifically dementia, as well as cognitive decline. And I want to start off by just talking a little bit about what hearing loss actually is, because I think when we hear the word hearing loss, we tend to think about just not being able to hear anything at all. And that's not actually the way hearing works. So when we think about hearing, there's actually a couple of steps that happen. So the first thing that happens is that sound comes into our ear. In the ear, in the inner ear, in the cochlea, which is the little snail-shaped organ that you may have learned about in school, what happens is that sound, that mechanical sound, is actually turned into a neural signal. And then that neural signal travels up your nerves to your brain, and that's the second step in hearing. So we have first encoding of sound and speech that happens in the inner ear. That encoding of that sound is sent to the brain where it has to be decoded so your brain can actually stop and try to understand what's happening. And so really what happens with hearing loss as we age, it's something that happens to all of us. It's a gradual process. A lot of times we may not even notice that it's happening, but we may have problems within our inner ear that mean that the sound that we're encoding isn't crisp anymore. It's not a clear signal. When it goes to the brain, it's actually a little bit degraded. So if you've ever had a family member or a friend who's had hearing loss, they may say things to you like, speak up, I can't hear you. It sounds like you're mumbling, because it's not really about being able to hear. It's about clarity of the speech that you're hearing. I work with a good colleague, Dr. Nicholas Reed. He is an audiologist by training, and so that's a clinician who is specialized in understanding hearing health and in being able to treat hearing. And what he has explained to me, which I think is really helpful, is that as we age, we start to lose our ability to understand just certain sounds, not all of them, but certain sounds. So the example he likes to give is the sentence, "You should go to the pharmacy before you go to your house." And what happens in a typical decline with hearing as we age is that we lose some of the ability to hear some of those sounds, but not all of them. So it would sound like maybe you would go to Arma E before you get to your ow, right? So you hear part of the sound, not all of it. So then your brain has to work just that much harder to actually understand what's being said. And that can come at a cost of the other things we want our brain to do, like trying to make memories. So hearing loss is not an all or nothing thing. It really is something that is gradual, that happens as we age, and it tends to affect just certain sounds. So it really is more about the clarity than it is about the hearing itself. And so we have studied hearing loss in our lab, and what we have found is that it's really common as we age, even though we don't necessarily recognize it. So in national studies, when we're able to look across the United States, we see that about 2 out of every 3 adults who are age 70 years or older have a clinically significant hearing loss. And by clinically significant, I mean that it actually impacts your ability to hear and engage and interact in your everyday life. And that number increases as we age. So by the time we get to be in our 80s and 90s, it's not a question of whether we'll have hearing loss, we all will. The question is just how severe that hearing loss will be. So it's something that impacts a lot of people. And then we also know that hearing loss can be really important for our ability to engage. So it's really the way that we connect with our world. All of our senses are. So you think about our brain, it's encased in our skull. It doesn't get direct input from our external environment. That has to come through our senses. And of course, hearing is a really important way that we get information. So because if we start to have some of that difficulty with understanding speech as we age, particularly this can happen in noisy environments, you can imagine then that might mean that people are less likely to engage, or they start to withdraw from some of the activities that they used to participate in. So for example, church functions or going out to dinner with friends or other social engagements that you might typically participate in, particularly as it starts to maybe get more difficult to hear in those settings, we may find ourselves going out less often. And that is not good for our brain health. So if there's one thing we know, it's that maintaining social interactions, being really engaged, not feeling lonely, all of these things are really important for our cognitive health. They're also really important just for our health in general. And so hearing loss can really impact that. Another thing that hearing loss may be able to do actually is impact the brain directly. So there have been a few studies that have shown that hearing loss is associated with brain shrinkage over time. And this is particularly in areas where the brain is trying to process speech, but it can happen more globally too. So we think that hearing loss may impact our ability to think, our cognitive abilities, by impacting the way that we engage socially, and maybe by also having some direct impacts on the brain as well. So we have done a number of studies to try to understand if hearing loss is associated with dementia and associated with cognitive decline. And the answer is, in public health studies, we see a pretty consistent and a strong relationship that does suggest that hearing loss does increase risk for dementia. You'll see different estimates depending on the different studies that you look at, overall across the literature. My take is that it's about a 50% increased risk in dementia that's associated with hearing loss as we age. So that's not insubstantial. That's a large number, particularly when we think about how many people have hearing loss as we age. So we really wanted to try to understand, can we treat hearing loss? And if we do that, is that going to help maintain our brain health? Is that going to help maintain our cognitive abilities? And so we conducted a randomized clinical trial. And this is kind of the strongest study design that we have in epidemiology, which is a population health science. We really wanted to try to understand if we gave people who had hearing loss hearing intervention, and that included hearing aids. It also included some other devices that they could partner with those hearing aids depending on what they wanted their hearing experience to be. So for example, if they really wanted to be able to hear the television, then we had a certain device that we could share with them that would pair up directly with their hearing aids. So we randomized individuals to either get this hearing intervention, or they could receive a control intervention, which was just talking about the importance of health. So it was like an education control. And we followed people over time for 3 years. Everyone who was in our study was age 70 to 84. They all had untreated mild to moderate hearing loss, and everyone honestly was doing pretty well cognitively. So they were potentially at risk for declining over time, but they were doing well at the time that they came into the study. And what we found overall in the entire study population, we had 977 individuals. What we found overall was that there actually was no difference, that the hearing intervention did not preserve cognition over 3 years of follow-up. But what I think is really interesting, that was in the entire group, we also broke it down by a couple of different what we call subgroups. And so one group we were really interested in looking at was a group that we had already been following as part of a large study for a long period of time. These were individuals who joined us back in the late 80s. So we've been following them now for almost over 35 years. And they came to our study, they had a little bit poorer cognition on average. And they also were declining at a little bit faster rates of cognitive change over time. And what we found actually was for those individuals, and I think what's key is those individuals were really at risk for cognitive decline because they had more risk factors, they had poorer baseline cognition, they had faster rates of cognitive decline. What we actually found was that hearing intervention, when we compared it to the control, made your rate of cognitive change, it reduced it by almost half. So it was a 48% reduction in cognitive decline over 3 years. And that is a really big deal because this is not a drug, so it's non-pharmacological. And these are individuals that oftentimes, if they come to the clinic, we don't necessarily have ways to treat them. And it actually seems like hearing aids and other types of hearing rehabilitation may really work well for those individuals. So what we found is that some people responded really well to the treatment. These were individuals, again, who were at risk for cognitive decline. Other individuals didn't, but we're still following them. So we're now in the process of following them an additional 3 years. And so it may just be at the end of 6 years, we're able to see a difference there too. And it just took them a little while to catch up. So I think if you're interested in hearing and thinking about ways in which we can protect our cognitive health, we don't have definite evidence that it will help, hearing aids will help everyone. with respect to cognition, but it will help some people. And I think the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that right now, all of the recommendations for how we can maintain our cognitive health as we age have to do with things that hearing helps us with. So maintaining our social engagement, getting out there and being involved. We know that's really important, and hearing helps with that. We also know that maintaining physical function, being physically active, is really important for both your heart and your brain. Hearing actually helps with that too, because it impacts your balance. We also know that hearing is important when we're having communication with our medical care providers. And there's been some really interesting research showing that people who have hearing loss have less confidence in their doctors because they probably don't feel like they're treated as well as they think, they should be, because there is stigma that goes along with hearing loss. It can also be harder to, again, hear and understand instructions from your doctors. And so anything kind of related to maintaining cognitive health that's already out there that's recommended, we think that hearing can help with as well. If you're interested in trying to seek care for hearing, or if you have a loved one that you're interested in understanding how you can help them hear better, one option is always to see your doctor. So as I mentioned before, the type of doctor that helps with hearing tests and advising on hearing aids or other types of rehabilitation, they're called audiologists. And so you could go see them, and that can be a little bit time consuming. It can also be expensive for hearing aids. We do know absolutely that hearing aids can cost a lot of money, and they're not covered by Medicare or typically a lot of other insurance. So right now we do have another option available, and that is over-the-counter hearing aids. And so it was just a couple of years ago that the Over-the-Counter Hearing Aid Act was passed, and this allowed hearing aids to be sold over the market, over the free market. And so you can find them anywhere. You can find them in a drugstore, you can find them online. I think what's tricky is that some of those over-the-counter hearing aid products, they're a lot cheaper than your traditional hearing aids, but they may not work as well. In fact, there's a large variability on how well they work. So I always encourage going to a trusted list where people have reviewed those, for example, Consumer Reports, and other agencies have lists of over-the-counter hearing aids that are better than other options, so that we don't waste money when we spend money on those. Another thing that just happened recently is that Apple now has their AirPod Pro 2 can also serve as hearing aids, and you can actually take a hearing test as well. So that's a new development, but it does require a software update. It also requires having the latest AirPods as well as, an up-to-date tablet or phone, which I know can also be expensive as well. But that's another option that's available that would be over the counter. Yeah, so I think, in summary, I'd say we do think that hearing is important for your cognitive health. Hearing amplification, hearing aids may not help everyone directly with cognition, but we do know that it's important for quality of life. We do know it allows us to maintain our social engagement, maintain our physical activity. And so I do encourage you, if you have any questions about your hearing, to ask your doctor. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deal. Oh, what a wonderful conversation. I'm so interested in this, and I have so many questions myself, but I'm going to give the audience a chance to ask questions first. We have a couple of questions in the chat. Jennifer, I'm going to toss it to you if you like to go ahead.
Yeah, of course. So I see, how is hearing related to balance? What is the correlation? So that is an excellent question. So, with balance, one of the things that we actually need is an understanding of where we are in the space around us. And hearing actually helps us kind of get that auditory perspective, so to put us in that environmental space. There have been some really interesting studies that have put people on balance tests. And it's something, the name of it is called Romberg on foam, which sounds like a fancy name, but it really is just kind of, you're standing on a foam pad. And so because your feet can't actually touch the floor, it's hard for your feet to exactly know where you are, right? And they have people with hearing loss, and everyone is wearing hearing aids. But in some trials, people have their hearing aids on, and in some trials, people have their hearing aids off. And if you ask people how their balance was, everyone says it's the same. You know, my hearing aids on, off, my balance was fine. But if you actually measure their balance according to their test, they do better when their hearing aids are on. And we think that's because it really kind of lets you know that auditory space around you, that environment. So that's the reason why we think that hearing is related to balance. There was another question. Let's see.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
Dr. Deal, I can read it for you if you like.
Yeah.
That way you can just stay focused. Perfectly fine.
Thanks.
So she's just no worries. So just thanking you for sharing. And you mentioned community. Physical activity, doctor relationships, and hearing aids are beneficial for maintaining cognitive and hearing health. What can we do now to protect our hearing before natural decline begins? And then there's a questions after that, but I'll let you start with that one.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. So most of the risk factors for hearing actually are things we can't change. So it's related to our age, it's related to our race, it's also related to our sex at birth. But there are some things that we do know are really important, and probably the most important environmental exposure is noise. So thinking really carefully about volume of headphones, when we're out and about, thinking about wearing headphones or other protective gear. If we're like mowing the lawn or doing anything with loud equipment, if we can wear hearing protection, that helps a lot. So really probably the thing that we have the most control over is that noise exposure. And so that's really the best approach to try to protect hearing as we age.
And then the other parts to it, which you've led into also, is how are headphones and earbuds impacting our hearing? And then are there other noise exposures like concerts we should be mindful of?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's such an important question. And the truth is we don't know, because it seems like wearing headphones or earbuds and playing very loud music would be damaging. You know, depending on the headphones we're wearing, a lot of them have some protection built in so that they don't go too loud. So it's a little bit tricky. It's not just that all headphones are bad. And a lot of times that can help dampen out some environmental noise too. Having said that, you know, I would encourage you not to blast it up as high as possible, because we do know, of course, that noise is problematic. And absolutely concerts, anything loud like that, I would encourage wearing hearing protection. And there are, you know, just those foam earbuds or earplugs that you can get at the pharmacy. Those do wonders. And so it doesn't have to be expensive for us to be able to protect hearing when we're out and about.
We have a few more questions in here, so they have heard you well. So the next one is coming in. The question relates to current or future testing guidelines. While, and I may mess this up, but just so you know, immunoassays are not diagnostic to hearing loss or for hearing loss itself. I'm trying to analyze this. Their ability to detect specific biomarkers associated with underlying causes or damage may be helpful. Do you see value or foresee these biomarker tests becoming more part of annual screenings?
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful question. I sure hope so. Right now, we don't have the evidence for that. So there are some agencies and organizations who really help provide guidelines for how we can screen for hearing as well as for other types of conditions like cancer. And one in particular I'm thinking is the United States Preventive Services Task Force. And this is a group that really tries to think about screening guidelines within a primary care setting. And right now, they have concluded that we don't have enough evidence to determine whether screening for hearing is important and actually is beneficial in that setting. And so what we need is more research. And so I do hope that some of these novel things that we can do potentially are helpful. I also think, honestly, if you just ask someone, And if you ask it the right way, so if you ask someone if they have hearing loss, yes, no, a lot of times people will say they don't have hearing loss when they may. And that's because it happens gradually and we don't necessarily notice it. But if you ask someone if they have a little bit of trouble or a moderate amount of trouble or a lot of trouble, people are pretty good at understanding that and knowing what it means. So I think even in addition to thinking about some of these in more advanced screening techniques, sometimes just asking a simple screener can help. And actually that is supposed to happen as part of the Medicare well visits that happen annually after you're age 65. It's unfortunately not happening in all contexts, but it is supposed to be happening. So I do encourage you, if you have concerns or questions about your hearing or loved one's hearing, to please bring it up during those visits.
Great, thank you. So like I mentioned, there are more coming in for you. So what I would like, I'm going to ask one more, so the essence of time, so that we can move forward. And if you would be able and so kind as to respond to some of the questions that I didn't get to in chat,
Of course.
Dr. Deal,
I'd be
that
happy
would be
to.
greatly appreciated.
Of
So
course.
the last one that we would like to go for is, should we be scheduling annual hearing screens as preventative measures?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I don't know about annual screenings, but certainly understanding a baseline screening would be valuable. And then getting it checked periodically, particularly as we get older. So for most of us, we'll start to experience declines probably in our 50s and 60s. These may be subtle and they may not impact our ability to understand speech. But there may be some things that we can still do with a little bit of subtle amplification, particularly with some of the technology that we have now that could be potentially really valuable. And I'm thinking particularly in the context of noisy environments. So thinking in a noisy restaurant. I was with a colleague the other night. We were out at a happy hour celebration. So doing all the right things, like a little bit of red wine, having that social engagement. And he was wearing his Apple AirPods, and just made a comment about how it made all the difference in the world, that he was able to more directionally hear the person that he was talking to, and it was less kind of cognitively taxing while he was out, so he felt more energized while he was there. So I do think that with the technology that's coming, and I expect a lot more to be coming soon too. So now that Apple has released this, I'm sure that we'll see it for Android coming in the future. So it probably will be valuable, I would say, to just get an understanding of what your baseline is, and then to pay attention and to get rechecked. Again, I don't think annual is necessary, but to just get it checked periodically would be a good idea.
Thank you, Jennifer Squared. I do have a question. I did see this a couple of times in the chat,
Yeah.
and I'd be remiss because I have to ask. You spoke about the relationship between hearing loss and race, and can you just speak
Yes.
briefly about that just before we go to the next?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just so curious.
Yeah, so it is really interesting. So I think in terms of individuals and racial identities that are more at risk for hearing loss, it's actually white individuals that more so. And a lot of times when we talk about differences in health between racial and ethnic identities, what we're not talking about is race. What we're talking about is things that go along with race and the personal experiences that we have in the healthcare system in the world. But what's interesting with hearing loss is that it actually may be biological. And so the melanin that pigments skin is also found in the cochlea, and it protects the cochlea against a lot of things that can happen as we age that actually degrade it. And they've done some really interesting studies. So for example, ambulance drivers, when they've compared hearing loss by race. And so of course, these are individuals exposed to loud noises repeatedly as a part of their job. Individuals who self-identify as Black are less likely to have hearing loss than individuals who self-identify as white. And there's some interesting correlates from the animal world. So if anyone has ever had a white albino cat, you know that they also have hearing loss. So there actually may be a biological reason where the melanin, and that would happen in anyone who has melanin in their skin and then in their inner ear and other parts of their body, may actually be protected a little bit more against hearing loss.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dillon. Thank you very much for that. And thank you everybody for indulging me with that last question. Okay, so next I would like to introduce our head expert, Dr. Travonia Brown-Hughes. Dr. Brown-Hughes is an associate professor in the Department of Biology and the executive director of the Center of Outreach in Alzheimer's, Aging, and Community Health at North Carolina A&T State University. I want y'all Aggie proud right now, but I'm going to bury it deep down inside. And the faculty affiliate of the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity at Wake Forest University. She served on the board of directors for Southeastern Chapter of the Alzheimer's Association from 2018 to 2023, and was appointed to serve on the Virginia State of Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders Commission by the Governor Ralph Northam from 2020 to 2023. Her research interests are grounded in the study of cognitive aging in minority populations, Alzheimer's disease, and health disparities research. As Johns Hopkins University Resource Centers for Minority Aging and Research scientist, Dr. Brown-Hughes' current research focuses on identification of differential risk and protective factors for early progression of Alzheimer's disease and the awareness and knowledge about Alzheimer's disease and dementia among midlife and older African Americans. She is a caregiver for her father who has vascular dementia. Dr. Brown will discuss the importance of African Americans in research and clinical trials. Dr. Brown-Hughes, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so very much. It's truly an honor to be here. So let me share my screen with you all. Okay, so are you able to see my screen?
We are.
All right, excellent. Again, thank you for allowing me to come to speak with you all today. And can I get an Aggie?
Pride.
All
Aggie
right.
pride. Sorry, it would get really loud.
Thank you. And truly, it's an honor to be here at North Carolina A&T. Prior to my coming to North Carolina A&T, I was at Hampton University. So go Pirates. And I'm also an alumni of Hampton University. So I want to talk to you all today about the importance of African Americans in clinical trials and also in research in general. And I will be joined later on by my colleague, Dr. Corinne Pettigrew. So I want to start my talk off by posing a question. What if a meeting was held and you were not present for that meeting? Decisions were made based on who showed up for the meeting. Most of the people who showed up were very similar in many ways. The decisions that were made at the meeting affected everyone in the company, although the needs of some people were never brought up or heard. The decisions made did not benefit everyone, but they were applied to everyone. And why is this so important? Well, it's important because although African Americans make up 13% of the total US population, they only account for about 5% of clinical trial participants in the US. Decisions are being made about the safety and the efficacy of drugs during clinical trials and generalized to all people, although all people are not represented in these trials. Drug guidelines that physicians follow, set by the FDA, as treatment guidelines are often geared towards whites because of the lack of Black participants in these studies. We cannot say that a drug or treatment will work for all people when all people have not participated in the study that was done to gather evidence about its safety or its efficacy. Can we say that a drug will be safe and effective for all people who take it if all people or not enough people participated in a study to make that determination? No, we can't. But what assurances do we have that trials are safe? Well, after the Tuskegee study in 1974, the National Research Act was signed into law to protect all research participants, and under Bill Clinton, the President's Council on Bioethics was created. All organizations must have an institutional review board that has the authority to approve, to reject, or shut down a study. Someone might say, hey, given the past experiences of African Americans in this country, we have good reason to be hesitant about participating in clinical trials. Yes, without question. Past studies like the Tuskegee experiment, the Henrietta Lacks case, in which African Americans were taken advantage of, the mistrust of formal healthcare systems, and the history of discrimination and racism in this country towards African Americans have all contributed to why African Americans do not feel comfortable participating in clinical research. Also, a lack of knowledge about studies. Oftentimes, African Americans will say, "No one asked me." Being excluded from some studies due to chronic conditions, trial sites that are too far, and not seeing anyone on the research team if you do sign up to participate in a study that looks like you, are all valid reasons that should be acknowledged and taken very seriously. But one of the things that I want you all to know is that as a research participant, you are in the driver's seat. You are in control. You have a right as a research participant to be informed about every aspect of what you are being asked to do in a study. There should be no surprises. There should be nothing that you're asked to do or that you're asked to complete that you were not aware of. You have the right to refuse to be in a study at all. You have the right to stop participating in the study at any time. So at any time, you may sign up and say, "This is something that I want to do." And after one visit, say, "You know what? This is not for me." You have that right as a research participant. You have a right to be informed about all study benefits and risks. So you have a right to be informed about how you might benefit from participating in a study, but also what are some of the risks. You have the right to know who will see your information that may be collected about you and how your information will be protected and kept private. You have the right to be informed about any study costs, if there are any study costs, and if you will be paid for your time. You have the right to know who to call if you feel that something is wrong or things don't go as you thought that they would. You have the right to know if anything changes with the study or a new discovery is made. If for whatever reason they came out with a cure while you were in a clinical trial, you have a right to be informed of that you no longer need to participate in this study because they have a cure now. You have a right to know if anything should happen, who will pay for your treatment. So again, trust, but verify. And just know, if you take nothing else away from my discussion, just know that as a research participant, you are in control. You might ask, what if I don't feel comfortable participating in a clinical trial? What if I just want to take small steps? What if I don't want to, be a part of a major study right now? Well, I just want you to know there are different types of research studies. There are studies in which cognitive testing is done. You might play a brain game on a computer, invasive studies in which you may be asked to donate blood, clinical trials in which you may be asked to take a medication or to try a medical device, brain donation studies, and imaging studies in which you might be asked to allow them to, you may be asked to do a PET scan or an MRI. Again, something that your doctor might ask you to do. But there are also observational studies in which you're asked to complete a survey or to be a part of a focus group. Again, there are studies out there that a researcher may just want your opinion, so you don't have to give blood or take medication or anything of that nature. So always remember there are different types of studies, and all of them are very important because each study helps scientists to discover pieces of a puzzle in an effort to put those pieces together to come up with solutions or treatments for different issues. I wanted to share with you all that in 2022, my team and we received an R01 from the NIA to conduct the Black American United Memory and Aging Project. The aim of the study is to identify how different factors, sociocultural, behavioral, and environmental factors might be associated with cognitive functioning and or cognitive decline in a cohort of 600 African Americans aged 55 and older. This is the website that you can go to now. We have begun to recruit participants for the study. You can sign up for a waiting list as of now, and when we actively start recruiting participants, we will reach out to you. The study itself will compensate participants for their time. Individuals can receive $25 for completing a questionnaire, $25 for completing an online memory test. And the tests are just like games, brain games that you'll take online. And also $50 for completing a mobile app that has those same brain games on them over a period of 7 days. And we are asking for a urine and saliva sample as well, so that we can look at some biomarkers of inflammation. Again, a participant can make up to $250 for participating in this study. So I'm very excited about this study. I'm very excited about just being able to move our knowledge base forward, particularly as it relates to African Americans that have been so affected and devastated by Alzheimer's disease. So again, this is a study that you could participate in, and this is something that you can do from the comfort of your own home. There are no needles involved, anything of that nature. So if you do, or if you're interested, please do reach out to me. And now I want to turn over the program to Dr. Corinne Pettigrew, and she's going to share with you some of the studies that they do have going on at Johns Hopkins University at their Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Corinne?
Thank you, Dr. Brown Hughes, and thank you for that great presentation and for the opportunity to talk about some of the local studies that are going on. I'm not going to cover all the different types of studies that are going on because there are a large number at any given time. But as Dr. Brown Hughes mentioned, there are different types of studies. So observational studies, one good example, are studies that include annual assessments of memory and thinking abilities, as well as interviews with the study team that allow you to track changes in your cognition over time. There's also brain imaging studies that do some similar to things. So they do MRI scans, just as an example, to try to understand changes in structure and function and variables that influence changes with the brain as individuals age, and for individuals experiencing memory loss. And of course, there's also clinical trials. So there's a number of different types of intervention studies, maybe lifestyle changes or assessing medications to see if they delay the progression of memory loss, to see if they affect reduced behavioral symptoms in individuals living with memory loss or dementia, and as well as other types of studies. At the Johns Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, typically our studies include individuals around 55, though we have a couple that accept younger age groups to about 85 years old. And the range of studies, because we have so many going on at any given time, include individuals who have absolutely no memory problems, those who are experiencing mild memory loss or mild cognitive impairment, as well as individuals affected by Alzheimer's disease. And most of these studies, as Dr. Brown Hughes was mentioning, kind of do involve memory assessments and have compensation. And because they do involve coming on to site, transportation assistance is available. Though I should also mention that I do also love the idea of Dr. Brown Hughes' study, as I am also involved in that study, and it's going to be great. We're really looking forward to getting that started. So Dr. Brown Hughes, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about local studies, and I'll let you finish your slides.
Okay, so that's all that I had, but I will open the floor up for questions. If there are any questions out there, any questions in the chat, I'd love to answer them if I can.
Yes, absolutely. So there is a question at the moment. And again, as you guys are listening to the presentations here, make sure you put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as possible. And if not, we'll ask the speakers to respond in chat if we can't get to them. So the question here is, as a clinician, there we go, that word, who is involved in clinical trial enrollment, what strategies can we use to counteract these well-known fears in the AA community to make patients more comfortable with participating without implementing bias?
That's a great question. And I would say to that oftentimes misunderstanding gives way or breeds fear, so to speak. So that the more that individuals understand, what a clinical trial is, what is the reason that a clinical trial is being done, and what they will be asked to do, I think that that will alleviate a lot of those fears. Also, too, targeting the community that, that you're trying to enroll in a study so that those individuals know who you are, going to places like churches, like various sorority, fraternity meetings, talking to people about what type of research that you're doing and why you're doing this research. Again, my father has vascular dementia, and, I'm doing all that I can to help alleviate, some of the suffering that, I've seen him have to go through. I also have my own fears for my own health. But again, that's one of the reasons that, I'm committed to this research. So again, just being open, being honest, and being there to answer any questions that someone might have will go a long way.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the response. There are no other questions in the chat at this moment. Do you want to give another moment or so? Or we can
Okay.
also get those responses back to you. Jackie, back to you then.
Thank you. I'm going to need, we did have a poll that I would like to launch at this point.
Jackie,
I've
we've
lost
got the questions are popping in now. So do you want to go to your poll and then come back to the questions?
I do want to go to that. I want to do the question because I'm going to get access to the poll and launch them. So go ahead and do the question. I'm going to get access to the poll. You do the question. Thank you.
You got it. Fantastic. Good timing. So, all right, back to you guys. So what tactics do you recommend organizations implement in order to gain a more diverse research audience?
That's a great question. Again, working with the community, finding out who are community leaders, finding out who are those gatekeepers, I think goes a long way. Letting them know what is your mission, what is it that you're wanting to accomplish and why you're doing the work that you're doing, I think goes a long way as well. So again, becoming a part of that community so that people know who you are. People feel comfortable approaching you if they do have any questions, and they know how to reach you. Again, all of those things, can go a long way. It's one thing to say that you care about a community, but to walk into that community and no one knows who you are, and the only thing that you're doing is asking, can you help us? But at the end of the day, what can you give? If the only thing I can give you is education and information that somehow may make your life a little bit easier or help you be able to access care that much faster, then at least that's something I can give to you, whether you participate in my study or not. If you go to my website for the study, you'll see that there's tons of information about memory loss, about maintaining your health, about, wellness activities. We have information about exercising. We actually have exercise videos on the webpage. And the reason I did that is because even if someone said, I don't want to participate, or maybe I'm too young to participate, you can still walk away with information. You can still walk away having been educated. And I think that, again, sometimes depending on the company, depending on the person, if it's a clinician, if it's a pharmaceutical company, they do a lot of taking. This is what we need from you. But again, what can you give to our community, before you ask for anything? So again, I think that will go a long way.
Thank you very much for the response. So our next question is a good couple of questions here. So is Alzheimer's genetics, or can it be based on environmental triggers?
Yeah, there is a genetic component that is related to Alzheimer's disease, but the majority of cases, there is no genetic basis, to it. So without question, right now, we don't know what causes Alzheimer's disease. So that's why we are looking at genetic factors. We're looking at psychosocial factors. So we're looking at a number of different risk factors. One being chronic diseases like diabetes, like hypertension, that may contribute to a person being at a higher risk for developing the disorder.
Thank you very much. Next one. Let me make sure I get my chat here. Okay, so yes, are you seeing any correlations between memory loss and healthy living, diet, exercise, purpose, and community? Yes, I think you were touching on this too earlier, but yes, go right ahead for that one.
Yeah, so there have been studies there that have said again that your diet can have a very strong effect on cognitive outcomes later on in life. Again, so what risk factors in terms of hypertension, in terms of high cholesterol, in terms of diabetes may contribute to a person being at greater risk for memory loss or for Alzheimer's disease? How do these chronic diseases affect the vascular in the brain? Again, all of which may contribute to, again, memory loss. So most definitely, those factors, without question, play a part in putting a person at a greater risk of developing memory loss or Alzheimer's.
Exactly. All right. Jackie, are we still okay for a few more questions?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure. All right, so the next one, thank you. Yes, is how much research is dedicated to patients with type 2 diabetes and dementia, or what could be called type 3 diabetes?
So there has been a number of studies that have looked at the correlation or the connection between type 2 diabetes. Over time, it seems as if those individuals that do have type 2 diabetes have a greater risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Again, keep in mind that diabetes affects the vascular of the body. It affects the vascular, the plumbing, so to speak, in the brain. Over time, if you have a high glucose level, over time, it tends to make the blood a lot more sticky. And so because of that, it can affect those small blood vessels. You think about the blood vessels in the feet, think about the blood vessels in your fingertips and their hands, and why diabetics suffer with diseases such as diabetic neuropathy, because over time that, those high glucose levels can affect the vascular, not only in your body, but also in your brain. The brain itself is one of the biggest, it consumes a great amount of glucose. It needs glucose in order to be able to function. So over time, as the brain loses its inability to utilize glucose, it can affect the brain's ability to, like, it can affect the synapses in the brain, and they can start to break down. And because of that, a person can, one, be at a greater risk for vascular dementia or TIAs, mini strokes. But again, all of these disorders affects the way in which the brain is able to function, and the brain is able to like communicate with different synapses or cells within the brain. So again, that's more or less like a newer, I guess, phenomenon or belief, this idea of type 3 dementia. But there definitely have been a number of studies looking at the association between type 2 diabetes and vascular dementia, and also Alzheimer's disease. And Corinne,
All
please,
right.
Fantastic. Thank
if you
I was
wanted
getting ready
to
to say there's
chime
Corinne's
in.
helping some responses
Yeah,
here too.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but there are a
yeah.
lot more in there. So if you guys wouldn't mind and be so kind to do some responses as well to our guests, that would be greatly appreciated.
Mhm.
All right. So guys, I'm going to be introducing our final head expert, but right before we do, we're going to launch 3 quick polls for you, to get you engaged as an audience. So the first one is the types of clinical research. Would you consider participating in the following types of clinical research? You can click multiple different answers, all that you would consider participating in. The study regarding memory, a genetic study, a study that requires a blood sample, a study that requires saliva sample, a study that requires a CT, MRI, or PET scan, or none of the above. If you could pick one or multiple ones and submit your answer, we would appreciate it.
Wow. Jackie, are you able to see any of the responses that are coming through?
No, not yet.
I was going to say I have a lot of them up in the percentages and the responses. So you're
Oh,
getting
great.
some answers in here.
Okay, great. So in a certain amount of time, you go ahead and let us know, because then we're going to launch the second poll. What are you saying, Jennifer?
So right now, whoops, hang on, let me get back in here. So right now you guys we've got 80, and it's counting up. 88% is a study regarding memory. 64% is a genetic study.
Okay, great job. Okay, so we're going to launch the second poll. And the second poll is going to ask you about how you feel after this presentation.
Okay.
Oh, great. So everybody gets to view the results. Thanks.
So Jackie, it looks like audio may have gone on my end, but it looks like you guys, yes, sharing results here.
Okay, after attending this event, how likely are you to encourage family or friends to participate in a research study? On a scale, 1 being not likely, 5 being very likely.
It looks like majority, it's going between 4 and 5, Jackie, for the most responses.
Fantastic. All right, that sounds great. So we have a lot of great people excited about research. That's wonderful news. So Dr. Brown Hughes, sounds like we are moving toward getting folks involved in research. Our last question about caregiving, and it's going to go right into our final speaker. I want to ask about caregiving. What is your relationship with caregiving? Are you an active caregiver for a loved one with dementia? I'm an active caregiver for a loved one with different diagnosis. I was a caregiver. I know a caregiver, or none of the above. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce our next head expert. We have Latoya Biggs. By profession, Latoya Biggs is a full-time contractor with the federal government as a training lead. More importantly, through her lived experience, she is a caregiver for her mother, Eva, who has been living with dementia since 2017. Atola is an active member of the Binti Circle, a support group for Black daughter caregivers. She has been an advocate for the past 2 years with Alzheimer's Association for Maryland Advocacy Day in Annapolis, sharing her caregiver journey with elected officials in her district in an effort to bring awareness to the need for resources for those living with dementia and their caregivers. Itola is striving to find the balance in her life by continuing her journey or joys of travel, cycling, and enjoying live music and spending time with her family and friends. She's a graduate of North Carolina A&T State University and a member of North Carolina A&T State Baltimore Alumni chapter. Itola will offer insights and practical resources to support caregivers in managing stress and avoiding burnout. Itola, the floor is yours.
So good evening, everyone. And let me just get a thumbs up that you all can see my screen. Thumbs up. Okay, thanks, Jackie. So thank you all for answering that poll, and it's very interesting to see the responses. We know that, I should say, in our community of caregivers, we know that at some point everyone's life will probably be touched by caregiving in some manner. And I would like to also thank you, Jackie, for inviting me to share my insights and experiences today. So what if I told you that caregiver burnout is real? The statistics from the 2024 Alzheimer's disease figures and facts state that 70% of caregivers feel stressed when coordinating or providing care. So I'm happy to be here to share my insights on managing stress, avoiding burnout, and just providing some helpful resources from my viewpoint as an active caregiver. As caregivers, when we're experiencing burnout, we don't show up in life the way that we would like to for our loved ones or for ourselves. So I want to talk about how we can make some changes to do a better job. So this quote speaks to the importance of self-care. It all begins with you. If you do not care for yourself, you will not be strong enough to take care of anything in your life. And this kind of speaks to the adage that we've heard of, that you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's so true, because for those who indicated that they are caregivers, and for those who know caregivers, we know that the journey is full of a lot of stress, and a lot of sometimes indecisions, and just things that oftentimes cause us to burn out. So these are some of the signs of caregiver burnout. And I say that when we recognize the signs, it's very crucial that we start to become proactive in being able to address how we take care of ourselves and doing better as caregivers. And even as caregivers, some of these signs that you see listed here, these probably seem like they're pretty normal for, just burnout in general. But I would say that they're amplified as a caregiver, because there are so many, especially when you're caring for someone with dementia. You're dealing with a lot of things outside of just regular caregiving. You have a lot of behavioral issues due to the disease. And this does generate additional stress, in addition to financial obligations. So caregiving is not I should say caregiving is very costly in so many ways, because you have, your supplies, you have the need to hire caregivers, you have the need for respite. So all of those things are costly. So they are potentially triggering stress and burnout at a higher rate. So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is just spend a few minutes on each of these methods or means that I've identified as ways to manage stress. And I'm just going to give you some quick tips. I'm also going to provide you some references on practicing self-care. I am in no way an expert, because I am still on this journey. And a lot of times we find that we don't do a great job of taking care of ourselves. But these are some things that I've been able to identify, and I'm still working on them. And I feel like that if we stay on top of these things, we can really, significantly reduce our level of stress and burnout. So how do we practice self-care? I like to say health is wealth. So we probably would never allow our loved ones to miss a doctor's appointment, but we often as caregivers neglect, or we put our own health on the back burner. So a lot of times we are not current on our doctor's appointments, but we're so concerned that we are, caring for our loved ones. So from a mental and spiritual standpoint, so being specific with prayer. So for me, that's one of the things that helps me to reduce stress. Also positive affirmations in my day-to-day, just talk. So that positive self-talk, and then surrounding yourself with positive people. Meditation is something that I have recently began to make attempts at, in order to be able to, calm my mind and be able to stay focused. Physical health, as a caregiver, a lot of times we're not able to get out. I can't leave my mother alone. I am single. I live alone. So I can't get up in the morning and run out to the gym, but you have to be creative if you want to stay healthy. There are so many YouTube channels. There are apps that you can use. I'll share a reference or resource with one of those later. But we have to be creative, and we know that exercise releases endorphins, which are brain chemicals, and it really improves your mood and reduces stress. So that's something we really should take into consideration as we're trying to practice self-care and prevent burnout. Also, I'd like to think about sleep as being included with physical health. And I like to say sleep is underrated, not overrated. Sometimes people say sleep is overrated. The importance of sleep is starting to be recognized as something that's important to our mental health. And there was also a study done at Harvard Medical School that showed that people who sleep less than 5 hours per night were twice as likely to develop dementia. So I say we have to do a better job of getting sleep. Sometimes as a caregiver, that's difficult just because of the person that you're caring for. Their sleep patterns may be off, especially those with dementia. And then I also want to put in a plug for improving eating habits. So some of these things are things that were mentioned earlier by the presenters. So these are things that have been identified that will help us also to reduce our chances of later being diagnosed with dementia. So these things not only will help us practice self-care, but help us to stay healthy. And then respite. So respite is just our ability to get away and really rejuvenate and have a chance to take ourselves out of that caregiving cycle. And even if you can only get away for an evening or just a long weekend, I say it's so beneficial. And we know that there are costs associated with coordinating care for your loved one if you have to be away. And I'll also talk about some resources that are potentially available to help with respite for us. Social engagement, I think somebody mentioned earlier. So I say this is the opposite of social isolation, which is, to me, that can also lead to mental decline. We've seen the social isolation in some instances with the whole COVID situation. So from a standpoint of a caregiver, we're also sometimes we are not able to get out because of caring for our loved one. But I would say, along with the respite, try to include social engagement. So get out, whether it's just going to a movie, going to dinner with a friend. Again, be creative on ways that you can really be more engaged in a life outside of caring for your loved one, and then ask for help. So a lot of times we feel like we can do it all, or we feel like nobody can do this the way that I do it. But it really comes down to being able to be healthy for our loved ones, and also knowing that a lot of times people are really willing to help you if you just ask. And it could just be a family or friend coming over to sit with your loved one while you go out for, just a couple of hours to go to a movie or something like that. So making sure that we are asking for help to allow us to practice that self-care. So these are just a few resources, and these are resources that I'm identifying that either I've used or I'm familiar with. So as we talk about health and not being able to get out, I absolutely love the Nike app. This is a free app, and it has everything on it: meditation, it has cardio, it has weight training, and it's very interactive. The Bible app. So if you need that source of, inspiration, there are actually plans that you can, read on a regular basis to help you stay positive and focused. The next two that are listed here are local retreats, Sandy Cove and Bon Secure. So Jackie mentioned that I am a member of the Binti Circle. The Binti Circle is a Black daughter caregiver support group that has been awesome for me. And each year we do sponsor an annual retreat, respite retreat. And we've been to both of these facilities, but we actually sponsor our own retreats. So if you are able to just get away, and even the caregivers retreat, a lot of times will be able to give you um, an opportunity to refuel in a way that is not the same as if you're going away just on your own trip. So these are just two that I listed here: Sandy Cove, which is in Northeast Maryland, and then Bon Secours is in Marriottsville. So they actually offer retreats. And then this book, The 36-Hour Day, I think this was one of the first books that was offered or suggested when my mother was diagnosed. And it's great, The 36-Hour Day, because it talks about, it gives you some tips and insights into how your loved one is experiencing life, how things has changed. So a lot of times, knowledge is power. Having a better understanding of what's going on with our loved ones, that will also help reduce the stress and burnout that we're feeling. And seek therapy. So we can't do it alone. And a lot of times we will unload on our friends, and they will be great and they'll be helpful, but a professional therapist, I would say, is a must. And as people of color, I say we need to get over the stigma of saying that therapy isn't for us. And I think we're doing a better job of doing that. So I would, definitely recommend finding a therapist. And my thing is, choose sanity or choose insanity. So the therapist is actually going to be a great way to reduce stress. Also, if you are employed, you can check with your employer to see if they have an employee assistance program. So these are typically free services. They usually include counseling, and specifically, a lot of times they'll give you tips and ways to balance caregiving and work responsibilities. And then also another thing, if you are employed, is to check into the FMLA, which is the Family and Medical Leave Act. So this provides you an opportunity for up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave. So even though it's unpaid, sometimes you have to, choose what's the poison, sanity over, and make it work. But this is a way for us to be able to, be able to refuel, and also to be able to have maybe a little respite at the same time. And then for support groups, find your tribe. And I have found my tribe. So I'll mention again, I am a member of the Binti Circle, which is a support group for Black daughter caregivers. And support groups are a way for you to really balance your emotional stressors. A lot of times, some support groups will meet virtually, some meet in person. So, you'll just look around and find what works best for you. There are also support groups at a lot of churches, community centers, and then a lot of the larger organizations, such as the Alzheimer's Association has support groups as well. And then social media, the same thing, a lot of support groups there. So these are some suggested resources that I have. The top two, the Psychology Today and myblacktherapist.co. You can select to find my therapist, to find my provider, and find it by location. And what I like about both of these sites is you can actually see who the therapist is, what the therapist looks like, some of their services that they provide. So these are a couple of good sites. I list the Binti Circle, as I've mentioned before. And then on Facebook, there are a lot of support groups there where you are. And the great thing I should say also about support groups, this is non-judgmental way for us to share our trials and tribulations, to get insight onto things that are happening with our loved ones. And as I say, non-judgmental, because caregiving is so in your face. And we become so passionate about how we're caring for our loved ones, but we get a chance to share the information with others who are going through the same thing. So these are some resources that I'm just suggesting. And then also finding organizations. So knowledge is power. And a lot of times there are resources that are available at no cost to us, but we may not know about them. And as I mentioned, caregiving can be expensive for just different reasons, whether it's just the care itself of supplies and, cost, medicine, doctors, but also of caregiving, to have someone come in to provide you assistance as a caregiver. The Alzheimer's Association, their website is alz.org. They have support groups, and they also have a 24/7 helpline. So as caregivers, we're on 24/7, literally. In the middle of the night right now, my mother is going through something where she's getting up in the middle of the night, and guess who has to get up with her? But the 24/7 helpline will answer questions. They also give you emotional support. So that's something to be aware of, along with AARP. So AARP has a caregiving guide, but they also have a lot of free webinars on different topics for caregivers. And these are different resources that will be able to be helpful to help you understand just the processes that you're going through. And the last one that I listed here is the Department of Aging. So this is where you can check with your local Department of Aging as well as the state aging to find resources. Those resources may be training sessions, there may be workshops, but also locally, they have respite scholarships, they have respite grant hours that you have to apply for. In some cases, there are also loan closets that will be able to provide supplies. Um, and then in some cases, your loved one may qualify for a stipend for some medical supplies, as my mother has qualified, because, literally, gloves, underpads. A lot of individuals with dementia are suffering from incontinence. So there are a lot of supplies that we're using on a daily basis. And there are some opportunities out there for us to have access to grants and some other scholarships that are available. So these are some of the resources, and Jackie will be sharing the slides with you. But the first one here is a link to the Maryland Department of Aging. So they have a caregiver dementia support. So you'll be able to have access to some of those resources that are available. And the same for Alzheimer's, as I mentioned. This one that I listed here for bringing light to Alzheimer's, Hilarity for Charity. They actually have a respite care program that provides a grant. So this is a grant that you have to apply for. And then there's the AARP resources for caregivers. I was actually on a webinar right before this one, and I added this one, Caring for Maryland MD Caregivers. A lot of great information on resources by county, workshops and meetings. So that's something to check out. The Maryland Durable Medical Equipment Reuse. This is where, if you are a Maryland resident, if you need medical equipment, so this could be something as severe as hospital beds, lifts, rollators, or wheelchairs. These are free to Marylanders at no cost. So these are donated supplies that if they've been used, they've been sanitized and are available for repurposing. And then the link at the bottom, which was shared through our couple of our Venti Circle members, and they have applied and been able to receive free incontinence supplies. So some of these things may sound small or trivial, but if you are a caregiver, you know how impactful they are. And these are things that definitely will help to reduce stress, as far as the stress that we feel for some of the duties that we have to carry out on a day-to-day basis. This is a webinar that is going to be offered in December, sponsored by Hey Caregiver and the Venti Circle, and this is Sons Who Care. So this is going to be a webinar that shares information for men based upon just their experiences of caring for their parents. And I'd like to leave you with this. What if I told you that caregivers are survivors? So the goal here is really just to manage stress and to be able to reduce burnout. And it really is up to us as caregivers to make the change. So I would just recommend or suggest those who indicated that they are caregivers, and that also those who say that they know a caregiver, select something from the list that I provided and put it on your just do it list. So if it's better taking care of yourself better with exercise, or finding a therapist, or providing or using some of the links that will provide access to training, remember that we have to take care of ourselves so that we can do a better job of taking care of our loved ones. All right, so with that, I'll say peace and blessings, and thank you all.
Thank you, Atola. We really appreciate that. So if you have any questions for Atola, go ahead and put them in the chat and she will answer them there. As she mentioned, we'll be sharing these resources with you a little bit later. Those were so excellent. And now that we've heard some excellent insights on brain health, the importance on research and resources for caregivers, we're pleased to have Wendy Bernard share a personal story that ties all of these themes together. This meaningful information will be a way to reflect on everything we've discussed tonight. We hope it resonates with each of you. Wendy.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Wendy Bernard. I'm a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and caretaker. I would love to share a little bit about my mother's story and my journey as a caretaker, and tie it back to some of the rich information that was provided by our dynamic speakers. A little background information. My mom was the only girl out of 6 children. To say she was quite the princess in the apple of everyone's eye, especially her father's, would be an understatement. She was and still is beautiful and has always been into fitness, eating well, beauty, and simply caring for herself. She shared with both my brother and I that she never really wanted to leave home, I wonder why, let alone be married. However, her greatest gifts were my brother and I. As I look back, my mother struggled with anxiety, depression, and sleep issues. My parents' relationship was what I would call functionally dysfunctional. A lot of walking on eggshells. However, we just never talked about it. On my mother's 56th birthday, her father passed away due to complications related to vascular dementia. It happened to be on her birthday. She was very close to her father, and I'm sure it took a toll on her. However, we never talked about it. Now, fast forward 17 years later, in 2016, my mom is 73. 3 days after her birthday, my father passed away. At this point in time, my mom began experiencing some significant decline in her cognitive health. She began isolating and started losing her confidence. All the while, it really felt like something else was playing in the background, kind of like soft music. You notice it, but you don't really pay specific attention to it. We later found out that she was also having issues with hearing loss, which she refused to address by getting hearing aids, and would often defer any questions with doctor's appointments directly to me. Over the next 8 years, my mother had 5 stays in and out of inpatient behavioral health facilities. And it was just last year in 2023, on her 4th stay, she was finally diagnosed with moderate vascular dementia, just like her father. I oftentimes feel like I never really knew my mom. She hid and tucked away so much of who she was, to include all the pain, guilt, and regrets in her life. She honestly gets it from her own mother, because she never talked about it either. And now, as my mother's cognitive function continues to decline, it is heartbreaking to see all that is suppressed, all that guilt, that shame, that disappointment being expressed as broken and unresolved pieces. I share all this because many of us, generations of us, can relate. We go through trauma, we go through death, we go through tragedy, health issues, trials, and tribulations. And guess what? We don't talk about it. We don't do anything about it. We suppress it and we suffer in silence. And it's a lot of times out of fear. Well, I've made a decision today. I will continue to love and support and care for my mother, and especially care for myself. However, the generational cycles of secrets, silence, and suffering, it has to stop with me. My children deserve better. Our children deserve better. They deserve to see their mothers walk in power, the power of knowledge, the power of understanding, the power of participation, and the power of community and connection. I'm making a promise to tap into all the education, the tools, the opportunities, and resources that have been made available tonight for me and my family to make sure we are reflected in the data, we advocate for cognitive care, and receive the necessary well-being support. By the way, I have a great therapist. I have a great community. I have a great tribe, but there's more that I can do. And again, it's really about my children, my children's children, and impacting our communities. So I just want to thank you for your time, and we need to get involved. We need to do more. We deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that.
Okay.
So before we wrap, I'd like to remind everyone that we'll be sending an email with a brief survey for you to complete. And once you complete that survey, you will receive the resources and links mentioned tonight. We encourage you to explore them and continue the conversation within your communities. If you have any further questions or you'd like to get involved in future events, please don't hesitate to reach out. Now, Corinne, I feel like we learned some words at the beginning of the evening. And I'm going to try to remember them. I hope individuals on the call, do you still remember what we did? Corinne, come back. Where are you, Corinne?
I'm here. I'm here. I feel it feels a little trivial to talk about a list of words after Wendy's amazing call to action, if you will, but I will do my job and prompt you. So I wanted you to take a minute to remember as many words as possible. If you can recall them into your head if you want, or write them down if you have a piece of paper handy. I'll give you, let's say, about 30 to 60 seconds, not to apply pressure, but just because I know it's getting late. So we'll go ahead and play the Jeopardy music now. Jackie, you got that queued up?
I do not, but I do sing. Me.
Go
I'm
for
kidding.
it.
I'm not doing that. But we will give it like another second or two. But again, everyone, I hope you have enjoyed this evening thus far. And I do want to secondly commend Wendy. That was a wonderful call to action. Thank you so much for that, because you inspired me by your words so much. Thank you. So Corinne, I'm going to try to remember the words myself.
All right, so I do want to make a note that this activity, this memory list, is in no way designed to be diagnostic of any memory changes or memory loss. Instead, our goal was to just provide you an engaging activity, as we talked about, but also an example of something you might do when, for example, you're having your memory assessed by a doctor or maybe in a research study. Because list learning tasks such as these assess one's ability to remember items over time with distracting activities, in this case, our wonderful presentations in between. So before I turn, if anyone would like to share how many words they remembered, I'll go ahead and read them back to you real quick. But they were cabinet, or actually, you know what, I have them on a slide. I'll pull that up just so you can see them. But there were 10 of them total.
Good job, people.
I was going to say, Corinne, as you're pulling it up, giving you a moment, they're trying to put those into chat for trying to remember, but there you go.
Here you are. So you can see the slides, the words on the slide. Before I turn the floor back to Jackie, just as a fun aside, you might have noticed that some of the words come from the same categories. Others were abstract rather than complete. And oftentimes noticing these things can help us use strategies to remember things, including in everyday life. So we saw that there were some items of furniture that kind of in a single category. There were some abstract items that might have been a little bit harder to remember because we can't visualize them, and maybe would have had to rely on other mnemonic strategies. And then a couple other just random words that I threw in there. So again, just a fun activity to get your brain moving and provide an example of a memory test, which we hope you found interesting.
It was very interesting. You guys did great. All of you that just even participated. No stress, no stress. All right. Thank you, Corinne. Now everybody can go home and be stressed out tonight. Or stay home. You're already home. Okay. All right. Now I want to introduce Marcia Johnson. Marcia Johnson is the Physical and Mental Health Committee Chair of the Annapolis Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. While she is new to the chapter and the Annapolis community, she is not new to the challenges of Alzheimer's disease present to families. Today is the 24th anniversary of her dad's passing after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Her mom was a fervent caregiver. She started a caregiving support group in her community with South Suburban Dallas and erected a caregiving support template that was recognized by Alzheimer's Association. I toss the floor to you, Marcia.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I just wanted to summarize some of the points that our panelists talked about today. So I'm just going to go over just everything that everybody talked about. We learned that as we age, we lose the ability to hear certain sounds, but not all sounds. So the brain has to work harder to understand what's being said, and it's about clarity. And the question is not if we will have hearing loss, it's how severe it will be. And that hearing loss is related to brain shrinkage, but we can use community and physical activity to battle against that, as well as over-the-counter hearing aids if we can't afford the prescriptive hearing aids. And going to see an audiologist, of course, is an important part of that. And then we have the Apple AirPods Pros, which can also provide an over-the-counter solution. We learned that hearing loss may be biological, and we also learned that as it relates to race, melanin protects the cochlea, and individuals that self-identify as Black are less likely to have hearing loss. In terms of being a part of trials, we learned that African Americans have been underrepresented in trials and causing decisions to be made and reporting treatments that haven't included them. And there are several reasons why African Americans are hesitant to participate in trials, and those were listed and they're very valid. And as a participant in a trial, you have rights, and those were listed as well. There are many different types of studies, and we also learned that Alzheimer's is biological and environmental, but mostly environmental. And as a caregiver, we learned that we can't pour from an empty cup, so we must practice self-care. That's mental and spiritual health, physical health, which includes sleep and eating habits, respite events, social engagement, and we must be able to ask for help. We can seek therapy, be a part of support groups, and utilize our EAP. And there are many resources and organizations that can support us, and those were provided as well. And that wraps up all of the important points that we have. November is recognized as National Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And as we close out the month, we encourage people to become aware of the signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, because early detection matters. Take practical steps to reduce their risk of developing this disease and live a healthier and longer life by improving their diet, exercising, meditating, and getting quality sleep. In addition, if you haven't already, check out the Johns Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Research Center website for resources about what we just talked about. Thank you so much, panelists, for all that you did today. Your insights and dedications are truly inspiring. On behalf of our hosts, Columbia, Maryland, and Annapolis Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Can Dream Foundation, John Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and Baltimore Alumni Chapter of NCANT State University. Thanks to everyone who joined us this evening. Your support and engagement means so much. And together we're working to create a world with greater understanding and support for those affected by Alzheimer's. We hope you leave tonight feeling informed, empowered, and connected, and have a wonderful evening. We look forward to seeing you at our next event.